So I want to speak about today about um, stopping searching and just starting to open to what the universe has for us. And I saw a quote by Khalil Gibran who said, "If the teacher is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter his house of wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your mind." So he's saying, rather than, again, being out there, the wise teacher helps you open up the wisdom that's within you. So I saw a story this week. It's really interesting. I read it in a book, and the person that wrote it said, "I have a joke for you." And, well, I'll let you judge, because I didn't think it was funny. I thought it had a great deal of meaning, but it wasn't a joke, at least to me. So it's a story about a soul that comes down into a new body. So this soul gets a body, and immediately when he comes, he falls asleep. And, metaphorically falls asleep. And he goes through his entire life like that, asleep, and not realizing that something is wrong. And that's how he lives his life. And at the end of his life, when it's his time to go to the other side, a couple of angels come down to escort him to the other side. And as they do, they each take one of his arms to lift him up. And as that happens, he awakens, and he looks at them and goes, "Whoa, I must have fallen asleep. What did I miss?" See, I thought it had a lot of meaning, but so what hopefully he missed is less and less as he goes on in his life. So I want to read you a poem by a religious science minister named Dennis Merritt Jones, and it's titled "Through the Eyes of God." A mother views her child through the eyes of love. A scientist views the stars in the heavens above. A doctor views his patient with compassion and concern. A student views his teacher with so much to learn. A grandma views her grandchild and makes such a fuss, while God views itself through the eyes of each of us. So, in life, how do we view our life today? How do we view it? How do we see our life? And most of us are so busy, life gets really busy, that we really don't take the time to see our life through the eyes of God, how God sees us. And yet, when we take the time to do that, we're encouraged to walk, to talk, and to act with a greater sense of reverence, a greater sense of peace. And then when we do that, every moment of our life, every person that comes into our life, and everything in our life becomes a whole lot more sacred. So, I've talked about this book before. Alan Cohen wrote a book, and the title is "Why Your Life Sucks." And I have to tell you, I really like it. It's a really good book, but every time I read it, I think if I would have ever said that when I was a kid, that my life sucked, my father would have smacked me. I mean, you didn't use a word like that, and here he writes a book, and it's a bestseller, And he said, we give our power away. We give our personal power away anytime that we make someone or something outside of ourselves more important than we are. And he said, if for most of us, if we don't value who we are, we try to borrow some value from the outside world, from stuff, okay? And he said that that doesn't really work. And he said, unsucking your life is an inside job. I had to say that. That's actually what he said. Unsucking your life is an inside job. And the thing about it is, we don't need to import the power. That the power is there because we were all born with it. And what we need to do, he said, is to peel away all of the lies and all of the illusions that we've been told, because they keep us living smaller than we deserve to live. So Iris Krasnow is a writer, wonderful writer, and she's a really nice. I next month I have all of the daily guides in Science of Mind magazine, and I wrote a set. I've written a lot of them, but one time when I wrote a set, I used a quote by her in one of the daily guides, and one of her friends read it, and her friend read it and sent it to her. And this lady, who's like a big time author, she emailed me to thank me for using one of her quotes, which I thought was really nice. But so she, in one of her books, she talks about being on vacation with her husband and family at the Grand Canyon, and they're staying in a hotel. And she wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning from this really weird dream. And here's the dream she had. The dream she had was that her husband agreed to join a quartet of gorgeous women and move to another state. And so now she's up from this dream, and he's right alongside her. And so she said her first urge, that's it, Claudia, that's it. Claudia went like this. And that was her first urge, she said, to wake him up and say, what does this dream mean? Like he's going to know, right? And she wanted to wake him up and have him help her figure out what the dream was. And also, and this is where it gets a little more serious, also, she wanted him to reassure her that he loved her. And instead of doing that, instead of waking him up, she took out her journal and went into the bathroom and sat on the floor and wrote in her journal. So I want to tell you what she wrote. She wrote, Chuck can tell me he loves me, but I must reach inside for reaffirmation. And you know, as I get older and smarter about love, it's starting to work nearly all the time. And so what she's really saying is that, you know, I mean, she really loves her husband, and she goes on to write what a great guy he is. But in the deepest part of your life, you need to be able to reaffirm who you are and love yourself. It's okay to have somebody else love you, but you need more than that. And she said, you know, the more that we can do that in life, to feel loved without having to have somebody say it to us, the better off we are. And she said, you know, I have me, you have you, and we have our spiritual links together, and we all have our soul's work to do. And that's work that we have to do. But imagine getting woken up. Imagine if she had woken him up and said, where are you going with those 4 women? So Carolyn Mace also writes about how important it is to go within. And she says, ask yourself, what is this self of mine? What is this self of mine? She said, keep trying to feel your way into the question and ask yourself, who am I? And she said, when you do that, and when you can really make contact, you feel, she said, you feel a sense of relief from objects. She said, you feel an atmosphere of freedom, of liberation, and of release. She said, release from identifying with objects, with a bunch of objects that come into your life, stay a little while, and then leave. You feel relief and a freedom from them, because she said, according to the mystics, the closer that we get to our true self, the greater is our sense of infinite freedom. And she said, the closer you get to your true self, the closer you get to God. And when we totally realize our true self, she said, we become one with and even identical to God. And the Sufis call this the supreme identity. I like that, the supreme identity. And then she goes on and she talks about a spiritual paradox. See if this fits. She said, you know, we all love seeing God in nature. You know, when you walk through nature, everybody says, oh yeah, I feel God in nature. Or when we see a baby being born. I know when my daughter had her first child, Becky was in the room, and I know how awed Becky was by seeing, you know, a life come out. And Carolyn May said, at these times when we feel God, or some other, easy way, she said, we feel physically and spiritually safe. Those are easy times to see God. She said, but we rarely open up to seeing the presence of God within ourselves because we fear the intimacy unless it's on our terms, unless it's the way we want it to be. She said, when we want help from God, we want it exactly as we need it. We want it exactly when we need it. And we want it to cause as little discomfort to us as possible. Right? Come on, that resonates, right? Everybody feels like that, Right, we want it delivered, yeah. And so she said, and we want proof that God hears our prayers, but we don't want a whole lot of contact because there's consequences. If you make contact with God, there's consequences to it. Like you have to change. You have to become more compassionate. You have to become more conscious. And she said, and I love this, she said, you have to overlook all of your friends who are still behaving the way you used to. Okay? So we don't want to do that. There's no more judging, and there's constant forgiveness. And she said, so we look for God everywhere, but we really don't want to see God anywhere in any way that makes the divine undeniably real. So she said, if we make God too real, and we're going to have to change. We're going to have to be different, and we probably like the way we are now. I don't want to always be forgiving or always be. I still want to be able to blow my horn at the guy in front of me that doesn't start to go when the light turns green, and all of that other stuff. So somebody else who talks about this is Barbara DeAngelo. She's written a new book, by the way, called Soul Shifts, and it is really a good. We both have started to read it. In fact, Becky told me when she picked it up and started to read right at the beginning of it, she started crying. It grabbed her so much. It's called Soul Shifts. It's a really good book. Maybe when we finish one of our books in the book group. So she said in there, she said, life is a series of questions. Like when you're a child, can you carry me? Why do I have to brush my teeth? The questions little kids ask. And then when you grow up and you're an adolescent, she said, questions like, why can't I stay over my friend's house? How come my teacher hates me? How come I don't like the way I look? And then she says, when you get to be an adult, the questions get deeper. Like, where do I want to live? And then when you meet somebody, is this the person that I want to spend the rest of my life with? Or are we ready? Are we ready now to have a family? And she goes on and she says, when you're a seeker, when you're a seeker, when the questions get even deeper and they start to change, and you start to ask sacred questions like, what is my purpose in life? How can I find peace inside myself? Those are much deeper and more sacred questions. And she tells a story in the book that one of her favorite places in the whole world is Sedona. And she does a lot of workshops in Sedona. And so she was about to do a workshop, and she got there a day early, and she likes to go to the vortexes. And so she was going up to a vortex called Bell Rock. And as she was walking up towards it, she saw a couple walking down, having left it. And she said the wife was walking well ahead of the husband, who was obviously really, really angry. You could see it from a distance. His face was red, and he was saying something, and she couldn't hear what it was until she got closer. And when she got closer, what the husband was saying to his wife is, I don't get what the big deal is. I didn't feel a damn thing. And he kept repeating that over. I don't know, what the big deal is. I didn't feel a damn thing. And as they crossed, Barbara could see that the wife was really embarrassed and trying to walk as fast as she could to get away from him. And she said later on, when she got got back to her room, she had a real aha moment about that little moment she had with the couple. She said what she realized was he didn't open himself up to what was happening. And she said so many people live their life like that. They don't wait. She said we should live our life. Don't wait for something to open you up. Open yourself up first, and then you can receive whatever there is to be received. So I got to tell you this story. I wasn't going to do this because I knew a minister when we lived in Southern California. We have a church. We used to have a church in Sedona. We don't anymore. But he was visiting the minister who had the church in Sedona, a woman. And they went to one of these vortexes. This is going to ruin my story, but they went to one of these vortexes, and they're sitting there with their eyes closed in this meditative place. And the minister who had the church in Sedona said to this other minister, "Do you feel it? Do you feel it?" And he didn't feel anything. But he said to her, yeah, I really feel it. And she turned to him and she said, "Damn, I never feel anything when I come." So, now if we could get serious, Barbara DeAngelo said that there's nothing missing in us. And we suffer not because of what we don't have or because who we aren't. We suffer because we've forgotten who we are and what we have. And she said there's a saying that all ignorance is memory loss. That I forgot that I'm divine and magnificent. I forgot I know how to love. I forgot I have so much wisdom inside of me. And she said when we remember, it's like coming home, because it is coming home. So I want to close with something by Ernest Holmes from the book, this thing called Life. And he said, you must have faith in something greater than your previous experiences. You must bind yourself back in faith to the God principle within you. If we come daily to the supreme life of all, if we let the dead bury their dead, if we forget the impositions placed upon us by our own imaginations or the dictatorial attempts of life to replace the joy which belongs to everyone, we shall soon plunge into the ocean of our being, where wholeness and peace abide forever. And he went on and he said, don't be afraid of being spiritual. Since earliest history, men have felt the presence of life, believed in it, and communicated with it, and they have received direct answers from it. Our difficulty lies not so much in contradicting this truth as in cultivating an inner awareness, a deep spiritual realization that we are all one with all the presence and all the power that there is. And so it is. So God bless you. Thank you for being here, and have a wonderful week.